going to present the YABA or methamphetamine or synthetic drug situation in the region based on our latest report that was published in June this year. This is the regional synthetic drug report. Then we will skip over to a different situation with my other colleague, Dr. Zin Ko, who will talk about the treatment side and the discussion and the results from a recent meeting that they held also in the region here, and will present those details to us. And we will have a short video presentation from Dr. Singh from WHO Center in New Delhi in India. And last but not least, Alex, you know, the C colleague, who works also in the region, and he will present some of the tools that the International Narcotics Control Board has available looking into synthetic drugs in general, correct? So not to use much more time, and then after that we will open for some questions if there are any. I will hand over to Kundi for the first presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Rainer, for giving me the floor. First, I'd like to say no one introduced Mr. Rainer Pungzet, who is our drugs team lead at the UNODC Regional Office for Southeast Asia and the Pacific. So at the end of the presentations, if you have any questions, he can answer all of them. So please direct all your questions to him. So as he mentioned, I will just be going briefly. I'll try to be brief about the regional situation in East and Southeast Asia. For more details, as you mentioned, this was published in our report, so we can also share a link to the report afterwards. You can contact me afterwards or us afterwards if you have any questions about any of the things that I talk about today. So first, with the presentation themes, just to go over some of the things that I'll be mentioning today. First is the explosive growth in the synthetic drug market, particularly for methamphetamine in the region, stemming from the spillover of the drug production from Shan State, Myanmar into other areas in East and Southeast Asia. Also, we've been noticing emerging trafficking corridors. Aside from the ones that we see year on year, we've been seeing more trafficking interregionally as well, and also using some other routes within the region. We've also been seeing more use of non-controlled chemicals to produce these synthetic drugs. And as part of this important conference, not only is the drug supply reduction important, but also as this conference is focusing on also drug use prevention and how we can better treat people who are using these synthetic drugs. So first, with regard to methamphetamine, it's already been said several times today that in 2024, a total of 236 tons of methamphetamine was seized in East and Southeast Asia. This is a very significant amount compared to a decade ago. It's over 4 times the amount that was seized a decade ago. And of these 236 tons, 221 tons, or 94%, was seized in Southeast Asia. The main reason of this is because since 2015, we've been seeing a migration of production from China to Shan State, Myanmar. And of course, with it being located in Southeast Asia, it has impacted countries in Southeast Asia more when it comes to the amount of drug trafficking and drug flows out of the production sites. Of these 236 tons, if we look even deeper into the countries that are seeing the highest amount of methamphetamine seized, we see that the 5 lower Mekong countries, particularly Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam, seized about 200 tons. So that's 85% of the total. So we can really see where the issue of methamphetamine is particularly concentrated in these countries that are very close to their production sites. When we look at seizures of meth tablet and crystal meth, this is just another graph to visualize when we talk about methamphetamine in the region, the total 236 tons, we include methamphetamine tablets, YABA, and also crystal methamphetamine, ice, as they call it in Thailand, or shabu in some other countries in the region. But we also include small amounts of methamphetamine powder and methamphetamine liquid, but they're relatively small amounts compared to tablet methamphetamine and crystal methamphetamine. And what we see here is an increasing trend of both tablets and crystal over the past decade. And in 2024, there are record amounts of both tablet and crystal methamphetamine seized. Thailand, as you mentioned, seized over 1 billion methamphetamine tablets alone, which is a very high amount. As you can see here, of the 236 tons, 102 tons was crystal meth. and the rest predominantly was methamphetamine tablets. So last year, actually, a higher amount of, weight-wise, a higher amount of methamphetamine tablets was seized compared to crystal methamphetamine. When we look at methamphetamine tablets, most of the countries that report methamphetamine tablet seizures are the Mekong countries, so China, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam. They've seized the predominant amount of methamphetamine tablets in the region, but we also see methamphetamine tablets in Malaysia, some small amounts in Singapore, and also in Korea. But in Korea, it's usually among the foreign worker population who are coming from these Mekong countries. I'll just go over this briefly. We can, if you have any questions about this, we can discuss after the session, because it might not be super relevant to the conference at hand. But we looked at the impact of the military takeover in Myanmar in 2021 to see how it impacted the methamphetamine situation in the region. And what we did to look at this was to look at the number of conflicts that had arisen in the period before the military takeover from 2017 to 2020, and then we looked at the number of conflicts from 2017 to, from 2021 to 2024, representing after the military takeover. And what we saw was, if you look at the total amount of conflict events in Myanmar, there was an increase of over about 1,000%, which is a very significant amount. But when we look at Shan State, where a lot of the production of methamphetamine and synthetic drugs is concentrated, you can see that there is a smaller amount of conflict percent change in the conflict events, particularly in East Shan, where the majority of the synthetic drug production takes place. So in East Shan, there was only a 42% change in the number of conflict events. So in the areas where there is methamphetamine production, you can actually see that it was rather stable, and it gave organized crime groups the opportunity to continue their production without being seriously hampered by the situation. As you can see here, we also looked at the number of cases for methamphetamine tablets and crystal methamphetamine, and we see that for the number of cases for both methamphetamine tablets and crystal methamphetamine decreased in the period following the military takeover. So this is also a reflection of law enforcement efforts being prioritized in other areas rather than in drug production, rather than tackling drug trafficking. However, we see that the quantity seized increased for methamphetamine tablets and crystal methamphetamine, showing that there is still high amounts of production that are being trafficked through from Myanmar to other countries in the region. Also noting that there is an increasing amount of methamphetamine seized per case. So before we used to see seizures of 100,000 something methamphetamine tablets per case, but now we've been seeing more in the millions per case. So we can see there's been an increase in tablets and also in crystal methamphetamine. When we look at the change in the meth seizure amounts, we look at this by country just to see how each year the situation has been impacted. And we see that in the areas in the Mekong, the lower Mekong particularly, there has been increase in nearly all the countries. Thailand last year seized the highest amount of methamphetamine at 130 tons. This is over 50% of the total amount seized in East and Southeast Asia. You can see what an important role Thailand plays in its location and also how it's being impacted by the methamphetamine trade in the region. Following that, we had Myanmar with 42 tons, Laos with 14 tons, Malaysia with 12 tons, and so on. So you can see still very high amounts of methamphetamine being seized in other countries in East and Southeast Asia as well, not only in Thailand. You can see the increases in Malaysia, in Brunei, in Singapore, for example, and also in the Philippines. This is a map showing some of the meth trafficking routes. It might be a bit hard to see, but we have the dots are the production areas, with the main dot production area being in Shan State, Myanmar. The red lines are land trafficking, the blue lines are maritime trafficking, and the green lines are by air or parcel. And in the past years, we've always seen that the busiest trafficking route is between northern Thailand and Myanmar, and also at the northeastern Thailand border with Laos PDR. But what we have been seeing in the past year has been more trafficking from Myanmar via Laos PDR and Thailand to Cambodia for onward maritime trafficking. We've also been seeing an increase in trafficking between Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines, with Sabah in Malaysia being used as the main hub for trafficking in those archipelagic countries. We've also been seeing westward trafficking to India, so South Asia is also being impacted by the situation in East and Southeast Asia. As I mentioned, we've been seeing the growing importance of Cambodia as a regional hub for meth trafficking. In 2024, they seized nearly 10 tons of crystal methamphetamine, which is more than 11 times the amount that they seized in 2020. And if you look at the previous years, it was a big jump, even from 2023 to 2024. And here's an example of a case. In November of 2024, there was a seizure of 4 tons of crystal methamphetamine and 411 kilograms of ketamine seized in Cambodia. These were seized on a fishing vessel, and the drugs were being trafficked from Myanmar through Thailand into Cambodia, and they were destined for Taiwan, parts of China, by maritime routes. So you can see the importance of Cambodia has been increasing in the past several years. As I mentioned, Sabah in Malaysia, we have some information from some of our Malaysian authorities of an increase in seizures of crystal meth in Sabah and Sarawak, which is this side of Malaysia. As you can see, it's connected to the trafficking routes from Thailand, from Myanmar and Thailand down to Malaysia, from the peninsular Malaysia to the Borneo side of Malaysia, and then for further trafficking to the Philippines. As you can see here that there was a 6 times increase from 2022 to 2024. Here's a sample case where Sabah was involved. This was a case from May last year. The seizure was made in the Philippines. And this seizure was 21 kilograms of crystal meth. It's not a lot compared to some of the other seizure amounts that we might see in other countries in the region, but it is the largest quantity ever reported in the Zamboanga Peninsula in the Philippines. So these drugs were trafficked from Tawau in Sabah going into the Philippines. So we can see that these drugs were trafficked by a drug trafficking syndicate that were operating through the Sabah and the Zamboanga Maritime Trafficking Corridor. So we can see that in the past year, there's been an increasing amount of use of this route to traffic drugs from the region into the Philippines as well. As I mentioned, we've also been seeing increasing flows of meth from Myanmar into India. In between 2020 and 2024, there is a 6 times increase in the amount of amphetamine-type stimulants. In India, they don't record it by methamphetamine per se, but they include it as amphetamine-type stimulants, so that is the data that we are sharing. And from here in the past, we used to see seizures of only 10,000 methamphetamine tablets, so on, going into India. But recently, we've been seeing seizures even amounting to 2 million from Myanmar into India. So we can see that the problem is also going beyond just East and Southeast Asia, but also impacting South Asia as well. For example, here's the 2.6 million meth tablets in May of this year that was seized in Mizoram. This is also another case example showing in November of 2024. This was in Sagaing, Myanmar, which was close to the border with India. And this seizure we just wanted to highlight because if you see the different types of drugs that were being trafficked, you see 412 kilograms of crystal meth, 5.5 million meth tablets, but also 150 kilograms of heroin and 3 tons of caffeine. That is an important ingredient in methamphetamine tablets. So these drugs were sourced from Shan State in Myanmar and trafficked through Mandalay with the intention of being sold at the border between Myanmar and India. And caffeine was smuggled from India into the area. Now, the production of these synthetic drugs would not be possible without the chemicals used to produce them. And we looked at the different chemicals that were seized in Myanmar in 2024 by control status. As you can see, most of the chemicals seized, 96%, were actually non-controlled chemicals. And we've been trying to see what kind of different chemicals have been used for synthetic drug production. And one of the ones that we've been noticing recently is propionophenone, which was seized, which over 1,000 liters of it was seized in August 2024 in Sagaing, Myanmar. And propionophenone can be used to produce both ephedrines and also P2P, which are 2 of the main precursors that can be used to produce methamphetamine. And this is just to show that based on the information that we have on the forensic profiles of methamphetamine, the main precursors are still ephedrine and P2P, but mostly ephedrine or pseudoephedrine methods. But we just want to highlight also that when we look at how supply and demand have been interrelating within the region, what we've been seeing is that supply in some ways drives the meth market expansion. And we look at the bar graph from 2016 to 2024 for meth tablets, we can see that there has been an increase in methamphetamine tablet seizures. And at the same time, we've been also seeing an increase in methamphetamine tablet users. Between 2016 and 2024, the estimated number of past month meth tablet users quadrupled. So you can see a very high increase in the amount of meth tablet users as the number of meth tablets have been increasing. For crystal methamphetamine, we also see a similar increasing trend in the number of seizures. And in the users, we see that between 2016 and 2020, there was a high increase in the number of crystal meth users. After that, there was a drop in crystal meth. But you can still see that it's double the amount in 2016. And this is understood because Thailand is more of when it comes to methamphetamine tablets and crystal methamphetamine, for crystal methamphetamine, Thailand is more of a transit than a destination for crystal methamphetamine. And one of the reasons why is because here we just wanted to show, it might be a bit hard to see on the map, but we wanted to show the changes in the wholesale price of crystal methamphetamine from the drug production sites to other destination markets. You can see how much of a profit these organized crime groups are making with the trafficking of these drugs. So in the production sites in Shan State, 1 kilogram is only about $450 US. But if you come down to Thailand, it's about 4,300 something US dollars. It's already a 10 times increase. If you go down to Malaysia, it's about 7,500 US dollars, another increase. And then if we go all the way down to Australia, 1 kilogram is 180,000 US dollars. You can see how much of a profit can be made when crystal methamphetamine goes from the production sites to all these different areas in East and Southeast Asia and even beyond to other destination markets. I mentioned mostly Shan State, Myanmar, but we also see methamphetamine being trafficked from other regions as well. For the Mekong countries, it's mostly from the Golden Triangle, Shan State, and it supplies most of the methamphetamine markets also in Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. But we've also been seeing methamphetamine originating from the Golden Crescent, particularly impacting Indonesia, and also methamphetamine from North America being seized in Japan, the Republic of Korea, and the Philippines. When we looked at methamphetamine use, we asked government authorities in East and Southeast Asia for their perception on increases in use of different types of drugs in their countries. And what we saw in 2024 was that between 2023 and 2024, of the 5 countries that reported that could report meth tablet use, 4 of the 5 countries reported an increase in meth tablet use. For crystal meth, 8 out of 10 countries reported an increase in crystal methamphetamine use. But there is still some good news when it comes to methamphetamine, is that we have been noticing a trend in there are increases in the number of older drug users admitted to treatment facilities, but there has been a decrease in the number of younger drug users admitted into treatment facilities. And this is partly due to, can be attributed to drug prevention programs and support that is provided in the communities through the youth to help reduce drug use in the youth population. Also wanted to speak, I know this conference is mainly about methamphetamine, but I also wanted to speak about ketamine as well, because we've been seeing ketamine trafficked in some cases at the same time as methamphetamine, as some of the cases that I showed earlier. In 2024, 18.4 tons of ketamine was seized in East and Southeast Asia. This is a bit of a decrease compared to the past 2 years, but compared to the period before that, it's still very, very high amounts, with Thailand and Taiwan, province of China, accounting for the highest proportion of ketamine seized in the region. And of concern is that this production of ketamine is spreading from the Golden Triangle, where it used to be before, to other countries in the Mekong. First, it was Myanmar. In 2022, Cambodia seized several industrial scale facilities for ketamine, and in the past year or so, We've also seen industrial scale facilities in Laos and also in Vietnam. The Vietnam one was seized in March of this year, and you can see here a picture from the facility. So you can see a very sophisticated facility and industrial scale. And this is for Thailand. At least in Thailand, most of the ketamine that has been seized through the western border, which is a bit of a different route than for crystal methamphetamine, which is mostly coming through the northern border. And as I mentioned, Cambodia is also has become pretty significant for Cambodia trafficking within the region. Although most of the ketamine that's seized in the region is produced within the region, we've also been seeing ketamine that has been sourced from Europe, because ketamine is not an internationally controlled substance, since it does have pharmaceutical medical purposes, so it's not internationally controlled. It's controlled in some countries in East and Southeast Asia, but because it's not controlled internationally, we've been seeing that there has still been ketamine trafficked from Europe into the region, and in increasing amounts. Previously, we used to see them in grams or a kilo or 2 kilos, but in the past year, we've been seeing them in higher amounts. So you can see here some 81, for example, in Hong Kong, these 81 kilograms of ketamine from Germany. And ketamine is becoming a problem not only in the region, but also reportedly in other countries around the world as well. This is just for your information, some prices of ketamine. And here, it's also interesting is that we've been seeing from the treatment data that we have from countries in the region, we've been seeing a rise in ketamine use across several countries, including Cambodia and Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam, and also in other markets such as the Philippines and the Republic of Korea. So this is concerning because, as we mentioned, for methamphetamine, one of the reasons for the increase in demand was also the push in supply. And we've been seeing also a push in supply of ketamine to countries in the region. For other synthetic drugs, just to mention briefly some new psychoactive substances. Previously, we used to see a lot of synthetic cannabinoids, and synthetic cannabinoids in several countries in the region are still the predominant NPS that are found, particularly in Indonesia, Vietnam, predominantly find synthetic cannabinoids. Since in China, China class scheduled synthetic cannabinoids in 2021, and since then they haven't found new synthetic cannabinoids for the region. But what has been interesting is that instead, with these changes, we've been seeing the emergence of etomidate and other pharmaceutical substances. So here, just to go into etomidate a bit. Etomidate is an hypnotic agent used for anesthetic purposes. We saw an increase in the use of this in China following the class scheduling of synthetic cannabinoids in 2021, and also following COVID, when the traditional drugs like methamphetamine were being harder to be sourced. China saw an emergence of the use of substances such as etomidate. And in China, it was primarily added to e-liquids for vaping products. It has since been controlled in China, but instead we saw, because it's been controlled in China, that's why they've been seeing the emergence of etomidate analogs in China instead. But in terms of etomidate in these vaping products and e-liquids, after their emergence in China, we've been seeing them in also other countries in Southeast Asia, including in Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand. So you can see this is a problem that is emerging in different countries in the region. In Cambodia, they reported etomidate not only in vaping products and e-liquids, but also, sorry, I'm going a bit over the time limit, but also in happy water and other liquids and other liquids as well. And here are just some examples of other vaping products that have different substances, such as synthetic cannabinoids, ketamine, and also, as I mentioned, etomidate. So to conclude, sorry for going over the time. Explosive growth in synthetic drugs, particularly for methamphetamine in the region. New trafficking corridors, as organized crime groups are very agile and adaptable to evade law enforcement and regulatory pressure. Non-controlled chemicals continue to fuel the drug trade, and also, as I mentioned, it's essential for us to develop both drug prevention and supply reduction strategies in the region to address the problem. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kundi, for your presentation, and you can see how the problem is growing fast in this region and basically also in Thailand, with in 2024, just with Thailand, basically 130 tons of methamphetamine in both forms, either tablets, the YABA, or in crystal. And just to give a sequence to that, and the challenge that we face is basically we are only talking about chemicals, which are very difficult to control anywhere, not only here. And second, we don't have access to the production sites. So we haven't seen a methamphetamine lab in this region for years now. The main ones basically as reported in the Shan state in Myanmar, where even the government has no access, and that's for many years. The last big labs that I saw for Myanmar is already 5 years ago. So, and that becomes a challenge for us to see what kind of chemicals are being trafficked into Myanmar and used for the illicit manufacture of methamphetamine. Because we don't know how they are producing it. The forensic results of the profiling from the methamphetamine itself in 3 countries from this region still indicates that the starting materials are ephedrine, pseudoephedrine, and P2P. Over a decade, at least, it has been discussed, but nobody knows how these substances get into Myanmar to the illicit labs, because we don't see them being traded in the region. There is no illicit trade, barely in these substances, and no seizures in the region. So on that, we can speculate. We have a lot of theories on what is happening, but we don't have any evidence on that. And just as concluding, I will now pass it over to my colleague Zin Ko. He will go into the other aspect. What do you do after consuming all these methamphetamine in the region, and what we have in treatment, and what we have seen over the last years on that side in this region? Thank you. Zin Ko?
Thank you, Rainer. I don't know. I think you can hear me well. Thank you, Rainer. So actually, I was asked by the organizing committee to present on the results of a workshop that we organized, UNODC organized a few weeks ago in the region in response to the increasing use of methamphetamine types of drugs in the region. So what the countries are doing in terms of providing treatment and care to people who use methamphetamines, as well as and what they really want to do in the future to address the problem, to address the issue more effectively, or things like that. So this is the background. So I still think that I should provide you with a reason or justification on why we needed that kind of workshop in the first place. So this is the actually the reason. So the situation of methamphetamine use in the region has kind of like increased or like worsened in the past few years. A lot more people are using methamphetamine in the recent years, like as you saw in my colleague Deed's presentation. And it's not only in the region, it's also globally that the use of drugs has increased. The number of people who are using drugs has been increasing worldwide. And according to the most recent World Drug Report, the number of people who use drugs has reached a historically high level, like and reached more than 300 million. And out of those 300 million people who were using drugs, 64 million people were living with drug use disorders, but only 1 in 12 people who have a drug use disorder access to drug treatment and care services globally. So while the number of people who use drugs has been increasing, the number of people who are accessing treatment and care services are still very low. Sorry. So this is this shows the increasing stimulant drug use in Southeast Asia. And what we are also seeing is that there is a lack of understanding of the extent of problematic use of stimulant drugs and their associated harms. So as a result, there is a lack of harm reduction interventions to address the need of the people who use these stimulant drugs. this slide has already been shown in my colleague Dee's presentation. So also like confirming the increase in the use of methamphetamine types of drugs in the region, and possible supply as a possible driver of methamphetamine market increase in the region, because we are seeing increased seizures of methamphetamine, tablet and crystal methamphetamine, and we are also seeing increase in the number of people who use methamphetamines in the same time. So we think there might be the association, but we cannot, I mean, although we cannot say definitively that this is the case, but this is somewhat, I mean, somehow like contributing to the increase in the use of methamphetamines among young people, particularly young people. So drug use and harm. We see that the majority of deaths attributable to the use of drugs is associated with hepatitis B infection, hepatitis C, and also the direct drug use disorders, particularly opioid use disorders. So when we talk about drug use and drug use disorders, this is something that we should never forget to address the issues of HIV, hepatitis, and drug dependency. So this is from the World Drug Report, the recent World Drug Report. So, so the impact depends on the drug itself, the drugs themselves that people used. So, and the set of the people, I mean, the individuals who use drugs, and then the context. So it's like the drug itself, the set of the person who are using drugs, and the settings that the people who use drugs. So if we want to modify the impacts, then we can definitely modify the individual modifiers and the contextual settings, so that these are the things that we have to look at if we want to, if we really want to reduce the impacts of drugs and drug use to people and their families and the people around them. The same thing, the impacts of drug use affecting not just the individuals using drugs, but to their families and the people around them and the communities. So drug use disorders, treatment and care is definitely something that we need to improve and enhance when we want to like tackle the issues of drug use and drug use disorders. But what we are seeing is that only small proportion of people who have drug use disorders are accessing treatment and care services. For example, in Asia region, only around 10% of people who have drug use disorders are accessing treatment. I mean, it's like 5% in general, but men are accessing treatment and care more than their female counterparts. So when it comes to access to treatment and care, women are facing more barriers and challenges than men. So only around 2% of women are accessing treatment in the region. So it is even below the global average. So this is the situation in Asia region, and including our countries in Southeast Asia. So this is also covered in my colleague's slide, but this shows that there is an increase in the, what you call the access treatment by people of older age group, but less and less younger people are accessing treatment and care services in the region, in Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore. This is a trend that we're seeing. So this might be due to the fact that fewer young people are using drugs, methamphetamine types of drugs, because of the prevention programs and things like that. But what we also should not forget is whether young people who are using methamphetamine types of drugs are actually accessing treatments. Are they facing more challenges to access treatment, or are they facing more barriers to access treatment and care services? because a lot of young people use drugs for different purposes. For example, sexualized settings, sexualized drug use settings, and they might not see themselves as drug users, and they might not find traditional drug use treatment and care services appropriate and suitable for their needs. So they might not be accessing the treatment. So that can be the reason, one of the reasons, and which is not very positive. We need to find ways to improve our services to better meet the needs of younger people, to attract them, and to make these services acceptable and accessible for them as well. This is sexualized drug use, just to provide you a context. This has been increased in the region, and the prevalence of sexualized drug use varies from country to country based on the type of drugs that people use and the available information. And most of the time, people use methamphetamine types of drugs in sexualized settings, along with other drugs as well. The picture in the right side is the a toolkit, training toolkit that UNODC and UNAIDS jointly developed to provide treatment service providers with information on how to address these issues. So we talk about drug set and settings and contextual factors. So criminal justice response and laws and policies are I think they are the biggest ones. And we see that a lot of countries that report to UNODC report that they still see drug use and personal possession as criminal offense. And basically the same slides. And last year at UNODC, they had the severity of sentence index, sentence severity index. And what I wanted to highlight is that Asia is among one of the regions with the highest sentence severity index, meaning that the laws are harsher in our region compared to other regions. Oh, sorry. So those are the backgrounds why we wanted to have a regional workshop to bring together the responsible focal officials from the countries and talk about the issues and discuss ways to address the issues better. So from 21st to 23rd July, we had our workshop in Bangkok, and we brought together around about 30 officials from Mekong countries under the framework of the Mekong MOU that UNODC is a secretariat. So there were treatment professionals, there were academia, people from academia, and then people from law enforcement and drug control agencies, particularly, that are responsible for treatment and care in their own countries. And we also invited some CSO leaders to share experience and also to raise concerns and issues around addressing stimulant use disorders and associated harms. So the key observations and findings. So there is perceived increase in the use of drugs, particularly methamphetamines, and the need for treatment and care, including for young people and women who use drugs, because these are the populations that are accessing treatment less. We found that treatment approaches vary across countries. Some countries still have compulsory, some countries are moving away from compulsory to voluntary treatment. But we see parallel systems of both compulsory and application of both compulsory and voluntary treatment services in the same countries, in many of our countries in our region. And there are center-based treatment and community-based approaches as well. And we see gender disparities. For example, predominantly men are accessing treatment services in our region. And common substances are methamphetamine, heroin, and ketamine. When we talk about methamphetamine, while we are talking about methamphetamine, we shouldn't forget that heroin is still a problem in most of the countries, and in many of the countries, and ketamine also becoming a problematic drug in many settings. And mental health problems, a lot of colleagues raised concerns about mental health problems. And the positive thing is that we see a policy shift. Legal frameworks in many of our countries are updated to mandate treatment over compulsory detention and incarceration, with a view of people with drug use disorders as patients. And for example, China, they're promoting a lot of investing a lot on community-based treatment, as well as in Thailand, particularly the mini Chanyarak model and the screening centers all over the country to support people with drug use disorders more effectively and efficiently. But there are still a lot of gaps and needs. For example, a lot of colleagues raised concerns around resource limitation in terms of funding, equipment, and skilled personnel shortages. And there is a need for the treatment capacity development, need for scaling up evidence-based intervention in line with the international standards, and to strengthen the psychosocial support interventions as well as relapse prevention. And there is still a lack of medication-assisted therapies because there are no available medication approved for treating stimulant dependence right now, but there were a lot of discussions around research and development for of programs for around medication-assisted therapies in the region. And we also found out that data system gaps, for example, some countries have data on the prevalence of use and how many of them are assessing treatment, but many of the countries lack this kind of data. And data usually, and many rely on the data available from the treatment centers, which is kind of not very complete and comprehensive. And cultural and social barriers, a lot of traditional people with traditional beliefs, lack of awareness affecting treatment-seeking behavior, stay an issue in the region. And stigma and discrimination was also a big challenge. So recommended action. The key recommendation from the group was to improve availability and access to treatment and care services that are based on scientific evidence, as well as that promote and respect the human rights and promote the voluntary participation in the treatment. So there are a couple of things that they discussed on how to achieve that primary objective of promoting the availability of evidence-based intervention in the region. And some of the recommendations were on addressing HIV, hepatitis, mental health, and other health needs of people who use stimulant drugs, including the addressing overdoses and acute intoxications. And one key recommendation is to increase and improve the regional discussions, like a forum and an exchange, developing a hub for exchange of experience and discussions, ideas to improve collaboration and improve access to treatment and care services. So I think with that, I'd like to conclude my presentation, but I'd like to show a little bit of the UNODC recommendations and guidelines that can really, I believe, that can really help countries develop and achieve the goals that to achieve their objectives of promoting the evidence-based treatment and care in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zico, for your presentation. And we have someone sending us the time controller over there. We are a bit over time already, but it's just to show and reinforce the idea that to have better treatment options, we need to know what is the problem. And that's one of the points that we lack a lot in the region is data on drug use, data on treatment, what is available, what is not. And that has improved a little bit, but it's still a challenge for the majority of the countries in the region. I remember when I arrived, the first thing that everybody told me, oh no, we are just transit countries, don't use drugs here, it's just transiting. And now suddenly, you saw it this morning, Thailand alone has 1.8 million methamphetamine users. That doesn't happen from one day to the next. So these are the challenges associated with what can be used as treatment, what is the best option for treatment. Why these discussions groups have been meeting recently and over the years, material being developed together with WHO, so we keep the health focus on it, but it's still very, very challenging from all sides. So I will hand it over now, a break from UNODC. I hand it over to, it's a video short presentation from Dr. Yatanpal Singh from WHO Collaborating Center, All India Institute of Medical Science from New Delhi. He couldn't be here in person, so he sent us a short video, and I will pass on it.
Greetings from India. I thank the organizers for this opportunity to share my thoughts with you on this important topic related to stimulant use. While I would have preferred to be there with you, but I could not be, and I think I still found a way to reach out to you with this, what I wanted to share on this important topic. In this presentation, I will be talking about stimulant-induced psychosis. Now we know that stimulants are one of those category of substances that are commonly used. When I use the word use here, it refers to any kind of use. Typically, we can divide it into two patterns. The one being stimulants being a form of drug of abuse, particularly in this part of the world. And besides and beyond that, stimulants are one of the commonly prescribed medications as well for multiple medical conditions. But we know that stimulant use comes along with a plethora of negative consequences. If you look at health-related issues only, there are many that have been attributed to use of stimulants. But the one that is most prominent among them is psychosis. That is why I have considered speaking on this topic for this particular conference, because we are talking a lot about YABA and stimulants. And when it comes to stimulants, psychosis is something that we need to talk about because it's a very integral component of the overall scheme of things. Now, another particular reason for me to choose the topic of psychosis in context of stimulants is that I am sure at some point of time during this conference, during the deliberations, there will be a discussion on the therapeutic approaches. And when we look at the available medications that have been tried to use stimulants, there is a category of medications that are known as stimulant agonists. Now, conceptually, this is nothing new. We are familiar with the use of agonists and partial agonists in the past. The most common example that comes to mind is that of opioids, where opioid substitution therapy is a very well documented and very well accepted modality of treatment. But when it comes to stimulants, things are not as convincing as of now. But that doesn't mean that research does not exist. In fact, research has been done in the past, and it is going on. That is exploring use of different stimulant medications for treatment of stimulant use disorders. Now, one of the common concerns that can come to our mind when we think of using stimulants to treat stimulant use disorders is, what about psychosis? Because we know psychosis is a significant concern associated with use of stimulants. And a very natural concern will be that if you think of using stimulants as treatment for these disorders, people are expected to experience psychosis and how to go about that. So these are the particular reasons why I have chosen this particular topic for my presentation. Now, to find the answers to this question, what we have tried to do is we have tried to follow a very systematic approach. In fact, we have recently concluded a systematic review where we explored three databases, PubMed, Average, and Scopus. These are three of the most commonly used databases to conduct systematic synthesis of evidence that is available. We carried out search using a strategy that was pre-designed and predefined, and we tried to be very exhaustive, very inclusive, so that we are not missing out on important literature that is available on this particular topic. Now, we were interested in all original research that is available on stimulant-induced psychosis, and irrespective of the context of use of stimulants, our design was open to include the studies. What that means is, while we included studies that included persons who use stimulant for non-therapeutic uses, typically abuse or use in a dependent pattern, we also included studies that reported psychosis among people who were prescribed stimulant for a medical condition. So our research included both kind of populations: A, those who were abusing, misusing, or having dependence or addiction to stimulants, and B, those who were using stimulants in a prescribed manner, in a therapeutic way. And we included all kind of study designs, including RCTs, non-RCTs, cross-sectional studies, cohort studies, case control studies, and even case series if they included more than 5 participants. We also carried out risk of bias assessment, and we used some of the most commonly used tools for different kind of study designs, and you can see the tools that we have used here on the slide. Now, coming to the results, sorry. So we were able to identify a total of 1,206 studies. When we screened these studies based on our inclusion and exclusion criteria, we were able to retain 71 of these studies. Out of these 71, 64 studies were about persons who used stimulants for non-therapeutic purposes. That includes use, misuse, abuse, and dependent use. And 7 studies talked about persons who were using stimulants as a prescription medicine. Now, please remember, these may not be people who are prescribed it for stimulant use disorder, because stimulants are used for multiple other medical conditions like narcolepsy, ADHD, and so on. So these were the population groups who were included in these 7 studies. The research is available mostly from US, European countries, Australia, South Africa. But if you look at our part of the world, the literature is primarily from Thailand and Malaysia, but the studies are limited in number. So the evidence from this region is rather limited, and we have to rely on evidence from other parts of the world for the findings on this particular theme. Now, if you look at the sample size, there was a lot of heterogeneity. There were studies that included only 11 participants, and then there were large population groups with sample size more than 300,000. So the variation was very significant. A typical preponderance was seen among males, which often exceeded 70% in terms of sample size. In some studies, almost 90% of the participants were males. Now, part of it may be because the prevalence of use is higher among males, but even if we kind of factor in that reason, this is disproportionately overrepresentation of males. So that is one thing that we need to keep in mind, that the evidence is primarily in context of males and there is limited evidence for females or other genders. The mean age of participants was around early 30s. But that's not the only age group that the studies included. There were children, adolescents, young adults, older adults that were also included in these studies. But the most common age was around early 30s in most of these studies. Now, in terms of most commonly used stimulants, the most commonly used one for non-therapeutic purpose was methamphetamine, while the most commonly used stimulant in therapeutic context was methylphenidate. Also, there was a difference in terms of route of use. The prescribed stimulants were administered orally, while non-prescribed or non-therapeutic use was for different routes of use, including smoking and injecting route of use. Besides these two stimulants, there were others that were also reported in these studies, including amphetamine, cocaine, and MDMA. But the most common ones, as I mentioned earlier, was there was a difference in the people who used it for therapeutic purpose versus non-therapeutic purpose. Now, if you look at or you compare the incident and risk between therapeutic users and non-therapeutic users, there is a significant difference. The hazard ratio for psychosis among people who were using methamphetamine was reported to be around 5.28 as compared to non-users. But if you compare it with people who used methylphenidate for therapeutic purposes, for example, for ADHD, the prevalence was relatively less. It was less than 1%. And even hazard ratio for psychosis was around 1.65% for amphetamine use as compared to non-users. So we can see that the incidence is much higher among people who use stimulants for non-therapeutic purposes. Also, it was seen that people who were using it for non-therapeutic reasons, a typical risk factor was prolonged stimulant exposure. And across studies, it varied between 4 and 14 years. And it was also dependent on dosage and routes of administration, which again was quite variable across the studies. But when it comes to therapeutic users, the psychosis was seen with moderate therapeutic doses, and it was seen even after shorter durations of exposure. So what that suggests is that probably these individuals already have some kind of predisposition to have psychosis, and stimulants were able to precipitate psychosis in these individuals despite of the dose being very small and duration being relatively shorter. A typical risk pattern that was observed for non-therapeutic users was heavy chronic use, typically using meth for more than 3 years. Another common risk factor was polysubstance use, people who were combining stimulants with cannabis and alcohol. While in therapeutic users, the risk groups were adolescents and young adults, because that's the age where these are typically prescribed for medical indications. Another important risk factor was a pre-existing psychiatric condition. And also, if the dose escalation was rapid, the risk was higher for psychosis, even for therapeutic users. There is some difference in the clinical presentation as well. In the non-therapeutic users, the most commonly reported symptoms were delusions, followed by auditory hallucinations and thought disorders. If you compare it with the therapeutic users, hallucinations are more commonly reported as compared to delusions. They may also present with paranoia. In terms of severity, the severity varies from moderate to severe levels, and it was seen for both these category of stimulant users. The mechanisms for development of psychosis have also been deliberated upon in literature. Although these are hypotheses, these are not well-established theories, but it has been proposed that the way psychosis develops because of stimulant use varies between people who use it for therapeutic reasons versus people who use it for non-therapeutic reasons. It has been proposed that dopamine toxicity is probably responsible for psychosis among those who use it for non-therapeutic reasons, because they typically consume it in higher amounts, which leads to dopamine toxicity. While a theory of dopamine modulation has been proposed for the mechanism of onset of psychosis if you use stimulants for therapeutic purposes. But again, what's important is the outcome is very significantly dependent on route of use in context of non-therapeutic use, and it is dose dependent when it comes to therapeutic use of stimulants. In terms of the outcomes, if you look at the treatment response, studies have reported use of different antipsychotics like aripiprazole and risperidone, and it has been observed that if you use these medications, the symptoms they tend to resolve. But the relapse rates are very high when it comes to non-therapeutic use of stimulants. And more importantly, the recurrence rates are also very high. But if you compare it to the therapeutic users, the symptoms of psychosis, even if they emerge, they typically resolve just because you stop using stimulants. Within the next few days or a few weeks, the symptoms they tend to resolve. And the chances of relapse are also relatively less if the reason for use is therapeutic as compared to non-therapeutic. Now, to conclude, I do agree that psychosis is a significant concern when it comes to use of stimulants. But what is important is the context. Using a stimulant as a substance of abuse, as a drug of misuse, or using it in a dependent pattern is very different from using a stimulant for medical indications. So we need to be more informed in terms of the context of use of stimulants, because the literature does suggest that the risk of use, the prevalence, the mechanism, the presenting clinical features, and even treatment response and outcomes is very different between these two groups of stimulant users. So when we are deliberating upon the possible therapeutic interventions for treating stimulant use disorder, I think we need to be cognizant of this evidence that we have with us so that we can make informed decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for your presentation. I won't comment much because he is not here, so it's hard to make a discussion on it. I will hand it over immediately to Alex so he can go into his presentation on some of the tools that the International Narcotics Control Board uses
Thank you.
in this region.
Thank you so much, Reiner, and thank you very much, everybody, for being here. I unfortunately am the last to go, so I will try not to keep anybody past how long we have. With that being said, normally I would be giving more of a presentation on the tools that we offer at the INCB. Primarily, our work involves coordinating with law enforcement, exchanging intelligence. However, for the presentation that I was requested to give today, I thought it would be also quite nice and complementary to my dear colleagues at UNODC if we sort of discussed emerging threats, patterns, but more from our side, which is the operational investigative side. So I'd like to speak a little bit on the modus operandi, the trends and patterns we're seeing, and a lot of what my colleagues have mentioned, particularly methamphetamine and synthetic drugs like ketamine, as well as some novel synthetic opioids, and see how we can compare the macro data to the sort of underlying modus operandi and microdata. And I think that might be a bit of a more interesting comparison. So how long do I have, by the way? Until? Okay, so
I give them some time for questions.
I really don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to skip over most of this just to say that the INCB, we're based in Vienna. We are the guarantors of the three main drug control treaties. My project here at the top right, our focus is really on synthetic drugs. GRID stands for the Global Rapid Interdiction of Dangerous Substances. And what that focuses on, again, I'm really going to mess up this clicker. It's down to go, right? Okay, here we go. Apologies, dear colleagues. What our focus on is that blue bar that you see there, right? So the red on the far left indicates all of the controlled substances that we have. Of course, that includes methamphetamine, that includes MDMA, that includes heroin. Now, that massive growth that we're seeing there, those are what we call new psychoactive substances, NPS, as well as all of these different emerging synthetic opioids. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard of fentanyls, as well as nitazines, which I'm going to cover later. So that's really the focus of our work. Now, you can see on the right-hand side, those are the substances that have been scheduled over the past few years. Now, of course, scheduling, as my WHO colleagues can also attest to, is very important. That's how we identify those substances that are most dangerous to human health. However, when we're scheduling 3 to 4 substances a year, the reality is that there needs to be another mechanism by which we, the international community, can also communicate and interdict and stop these substances from entering our countries as well as being exported. And that's really where that
It's a down arrow.
where am I pointing it to?
It's changed.
There we go. So where do we do that? We do that on both sides. It's a holistic approach that involves, on the left-hand side, the governments, private sector, international organizations, as I mentioned, of course, law enforcement, police, and customs. But that also involves, of course, forensics, health, toxicology, postal security, as well as the right-hand side, where we've identified sort of the four main pillars of where drug trafficking exploits the illicit supply chain. The manufacture, of course, the marketing, those would be social media platforms, e-commerce platforms, as well as the movement. Of course, we there talk about express couriers, postal, different methods of transportation, and finally the monetization of that. I'm going to touch on that a little bit later, but basically those are sort of the two main pillars of our work. Now, how does that look? On the left side, right, this would be the work with the private sector. I'm not going to touch on these too much because, again, I have less than 15 minutes, but really the main focus of our work is on these intelligence-led tools which are available to law enforcement. Now, what these do, these allow the exchange of operational intelligence and data for law enforcement to be able to better identify, predict, and then interdict shipments of all of the substances that we've been mentioning here. So we run a database that has currently about 120,000 individual seizures of primarily, again, NPS, synthetic drugs, et cetera, and then the platforms that you see there are then being used for example, customs analysts or intelligence officers to then be able to use that data to be able to see what are the substances going into the Philippines, what is being exported from Malaysia, what is coming into Thailand from Myanmar, for example. On the private sector side, of course, that work includes, and again, this is something that I think is very, very important to mention. Of course, all of us here, the international community, is essential to this work, but we cannot do it without the private sector, right? More and more, as we can all attest to having phones here. I see many of you taking pictures. I'm very honored. Thank you. Right? We cannot live. I, for example, live in Bangkok. I cannot live with Lazada, right? We cannot live with a lot of these different companies. Facebook, for example, Alibaba. But the fact that these companies are as ubiquitous as they are also allows them to be much more susceptible to exploitation by illegitimate actors, again, targeting, in many cases, children on platforms like Snapchat, Meta, so Facebook, Instagram, etc. All right, that's it. Now, what I wanted to do again is sort of talk about a few, I'm going to focus on two main emerging threats relating to synthetic substances. Now, the first one, I've just started here because I think everybody in the room is very familiar with fentanyl. You've heard it, I'm sure, many, many times. Now, fentanyl, and I'm very grateful for the fact, has never pervaded Asia as much as it has North America, for example, where I'm from in Canada, which is wonderful news. Of course, we've seen fentanyl be cut into all sorts of different substances, methamphetamine, heroin, etc. But what I want to focus on today is actually another emerging substance that we've been seeing more and more of in this region and really worldwide, which are actually another category of synthetic opioid known as nitazines. Now, these have come up really on our radar in 2022. Again, the fact that we have a network of about 4,000 law enforcement focal points exchanging information on those databases I mentioned before gives us an early insight into a lot of these really emerging trends. And this is a synthetic drug trend that we are particularly worried about. Why? Because if we compare it to fentanyl, so if we take a unit of fentanyl, and again, I'm sure everybody's seen or heard before the few grains of sand it takes for an overdose of fentanyl to happen. If we compare that to nitazines, which we've been seeing in our most recent operation, which concluded at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, this is the comparison with the most commonly identified nitazines we're seeing. So as terrifying and scary as fentanyl has been and devastating as it has been in communities throughout, particularly in North America, lesser so in other regions, we're seeing the strength of these nitazines is just exploding beyond that. So it's, again, terribly, terribly concerning. And if I haven't depressed you enough already, you can see, again, this is one of the tools that I'd mentioned before. I put here, it's not a North American problem because we can see this is the trafficking just this year that we've identified and that our focal points have put into our systems, right? So we're seeing nitazine trafficking all over Asia Pacific, all over Southeast Asia, particularly East Asia and the Pacific, but we are seeing trafficking in, again, these incredibly powerful nitazines appearing within our borders here in Southeast Asia. And just to finish off on that, again, when we're talking about the amount it takes for a single unit of fentanyl as compared to the nitazines, just to really drive the point home, these are the deadly doses that we see from those single units of nitazines. Norotonitazine, I apologize for my pronunciation, protonitazepine, and isotonitazepine, and the most lethal of which was identified during our most recent operation, 1.4 potentially million doses in the tiny amount that was seized, and that is NN-dimethyletotonitazine. So this is really the cutting edge, unfortunately, of the synthetic opioids, and what we're really seeing starting to dominate the market, again, not in North America, but globally. Okay, deep breath, and we continue. Now again, these are just some of the seizures that we've seen, New Zealand, Australia. They are, again, mimicking a lot of the patterns that we've seen in terms of fentanyl trafficking, which is being cut into the illicit drug supply of illicitly diverted or manufactured pharmaceuticals. These cases we can see here, these were both smuggled and pressed into oxycodone pills. So again, the problem of people taking what they think is licit oxycodone or what they think is maybe just fentanyl has now, you know, multiplied by orders of magnitude when we're talking about oxycodone pills being cut with nitazines. The next one I wanted to talk about, now completely pivoting over, and this really will focus on the region, is methamphetamine trafficking and how it has perfectly sort of fit into ketamine trafficking. So what I have here are seizures of a modus operandi that we've been seeing in the region for years. This particular tea, it's called Guayawing tea. It's sort of a generic Chinese tea manufacturer that my colleagues demonstrated before. So we've been seeing this in terms of concealing methamphetamine trafficking for quite a while. What's interesting is over the last year, we've seen not only the methods, but the roots of this also be completely and perfectly mimicked in terms of ketamine trafficking in the region. So we can see here certain examples of methamphetamine packaging and ketamine trafficking and ketamine packaging as well. Now, what's interesting is there's distinct packaging differences that traffickers use to differentiate the two substances, even if most seizures we've had actually have both of them in combination. So we can see here, these were seizures affected in Cambodia by Cambodian customs. You can see these ones represent various varieties of ketamine trafficking, whereas the first two, these ones are representative of methamphetamine trafficking. Continuing the exact same patterns, we can see that in Vietnam, as this case here earlier in the year. This one was actually done in international waters, using then GPS locations to then identify the packages and then pick those up. Again, we can see exactly the same distinction and delineation between methamphetamine and ketamine trafficking. And moving over to Thailand, we can see the same thing here. This was a case on the border with Myanmar. So again, we're seeing the same distinctions there within that packaging. And again, the sizes of these consignments have also drastically increased. We're now talking not 10 to 20 kilos, we're talking 50, 100, 150 kilos. So the trafficking routes are the same, starting in Myanmar, going through Laos, down into Thailand and Vietnam, and then from there, getting on boats and then being exported. Malaysia, not sure if that's me, Indonesia, et cetera, et cetera. Moving on. Laos, same thing. These are massive, absolutely massive seizures of methamphetamine, ketamine, as well as MDMA, with the same packaging distinctions in all. And lastly, I just want to finish on this. This is an interesting case that just happened a few months ago in May in Malaysia. And what we've seen with this case, not only do we have, again, the same distinction with the ketamine on top and the larger consignment of methamphetamine at the bottom. So in this case, we're talking about almost 2,000 kilos of ketamine, methamphetamine, and almost 100 kilos of ketamine, But what's interesting is that this was actually coming from Latin America. So we're now starting to see the involvement, just as we saw previously, of meth labs being constructed around the world with Mexican cartels. We're now seeing actual shipments of what were traditional substances developed in labs and manufactured within the Golden Triangle, now also being imported into Malaysia, then broken down again into the same modus operandi, the same tea packages, and then those being sent off onwards into Southeast Asia, East Asia, Japan, Korea, New Zealand, Australia, et cetera, et cetera. Kundi already mentioned etomidate, so I'm not going to mention much. The one thing that was interesting for us, this is an alert, again, that we sent out earlier this year. But again, what's interesting is not only that we have the etomidate being added into vapes, but also the fact that methamphetamine and ketamine are also being incorporated into that. So we're seeing all sorts of different mixes of etomidate there. And the last thing I wanted to touch on, how am I doing for time? Okay, I can do it, 5 minutes. The last thing I wanted to touch on, which I think is very, very important when we're talking about emerging threats in the region and globally, again, is the ease of being able to find and buy these substances online. It's not like it used to be where I need to go and find, you know, somebody under a bridge and have to give them cash. So I have a little demonstration here. I did this myself of how easy it is to be able to find and buy substances completely safely online. So as you can see here, I just put into Google, buy ketamine Thailand. And of course, Google is a multi-billion-dollar company, so they have, you know, well, I'm happy to say, they have search and privacy and security in place, that if I put that, I get results from the Bangkok Post, from Reuters, you know, not exactly helping me buy ketamine. Now, if I make one slight modification to my search, and I put instead of ketamine, the CAS number into that very same Google search, immediately my first two results are very, very different, right? My first result is this company here selling me, again, very cleverly, ketamine. And the second search, perhaps even more concerningly, is Facebook. So Facebook is now telling me that I can go on their marketplace and buy 30 kilos of ketamine. I can pay with Bitcoin, with Western Union, with Alipay, right? This is the front page of Google. If this part of the internet is not secure, then I fear to see what the rest will look like. But again, a very simple example. Now, if I click into this first search term here, I can see again what appears to be a legitimate website. But again, all of the indicators of illicit activity are there. Selling it to be my CAS number, right? Grams. Now, shipping terms. Usually, when I want to know how fast something will come to me when I order on Lazada, my first idea is not discrete, right? Again, all of these are indicators that this is a website that is selling me and guaranteeing me shipment of minimum 10 grams of ketamine. And if I look further, I can see here, right, Indonesia and Thailand guaranteed delivery. So this is really sort of the cutting edge of where we also need to focus and take a look at how we can prevent synthetic drugs more broadly being sold online, and again, how can we protect our most vulnerable, and how can we protect people from, again, being exposed to, as we can see here, cross-platform marketing. We have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, X, as we call it now, thank you very much, YouTube Reels. Most interestingly, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with SoundCloud, right, which is a music player. When we reached out to SoundCloud and said, your songs are giving me QR codes so that I can buy ketamine and Udalone and tapentadol and fentanyl, they said, but we don't sell anything. And that's the brilliance of these traffickers we're dealing with. There is no way that SoundCloud can even accept payment. But if you put a QR code and embed your email, your WhatsApp, your Telegram, and your Snapchat, somebody who's clever finds this, scans this, and again, is purchasing all of these substances online in a company that has no idea because they're not even looking for it. So I'll finish off by just doing a quick demo of one of our tools. Again, this is what we call Snoop. It is an online monitoring platform that specifically targets, again, vendors with these specific indicators that indicate that they are selling substances that either have no medical use, are dangerous, or are controlled, right? We are leveraging, in this case, AI and machine learning to scan over 1,000 websites 24 hours a day and look for some of those indicators that I just showed you, as well as all of the different INCB lists of fentanyls with no legitimate uses, benzodiazepines, synthetic drugs, etc. So how does that look? And I promise I'm done after this. Here we can see in the past few months we have almost 165,000 individual listings of these substances being sold worldwide. Now, I took the example of Thailand, and if I do a quick search and I ask for How many times is Thailand mentioned? I can see we now narrow that down to about 1,080 searches. So that means that there's 1,080 listings of all of these substances, as you can see right here, and I've made the list bigger. So all of these substances are available to me, which they exactly say we ship to Thailand. Now, what are some of the ones we have here? GBL, right, a very known chemsex drug, as was mentioned, right? This is often used in sexual assaults, sexual facilitated violence. Things like xylazine, which are added to fentanyl to increase the high. That's what we call tranq dope. Etomidate, as was already mentioned, ketamine, etc. The list goes on and on. Now, what I'm able to do, I'm able to create a profile on this particular vendor, for example, and immediately I can see phone numbers, their WhatsApps, I can see they have a Snapchat. All of this information is pulled directly, and this website is telling me, because of all of these indicators, they are using secure communication, they're asking for payment in Bitcoin, they're guaranteeing customs clearance with discrete packaging, right? All of these things are clearly not what a legitimate vendor would do, and that's why the tool shows me that. Now, if I click in here, you can see this website is now selling that GBL as wheel cleaner. These are all the ways that they accept payments. But if you just scroll down, right, immediately. Another thing that we're seeing more and more of is ketamine injector or added into nasal inhalers. So we're seeing that here, alprazolam, benzodiazepines, and of course the list goes on and on. As you can see here, this website is kind enough to sell me all of these different substances, as well as Apple Watches. So they really, you know, they just cover it all. It's really a one-stop shop, as we say. And again, we can see here, of course, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, you know, all over the region, Vietnam. So anyways, I'm done. I think I'm okay with time. Yes. But I just wanted to sort of give a very quick overview on some of those modus operandi that we're seeing in the region. And of course, happy to answer any questions afterwards. Thank you so much for your time.
Basically showing how complex the situation is becoming over the years. You have websites offering any type of substance that you want, which is not illegal, unless it's declared to. So you can buy, you can offer them, but the illicit activity happens only at the moment when the substance is moving from one place to the other and not following the legislation that's applicable to it. But most of them don't have any legislation. So if they just declare it normally, you can buy it. It's not controlled, why not? And you can trade it. Right? And that's the challenge. And with the packaging, with the integration from different production regions and very similar modus operandi all over the world and varying from drug to drug and to chemicals, and that goes on and on. That's the biggest challenge that the international community is facing. And the 3 drug conventions that are still in place are basically have one mandatory rule. It's substance need to be mentioned individually. So you have to go substance by substance, and you change them so fast as a chemist that you take them out of the controlled substance from one day to the next. And there's still no tool properly available on how to overcome this. Some have chemical families grouping and putting them under control and drug families and things, but most of the legislation doesn't allow that. So you have to go through substance by substance, and which is very, very difficult. Alex showed on the fentanyl side the controls that came over the years since '61 convention. When you look at the chemical side that started in 1990, you had 15 substances in international control. Until 14, nothing happened. After 2014, we grew from 23, and we are now in 51 substances on international control. And the drug problem is just growing, just to compare how difficult it is becoming. So I will open, we still have a few minutes. If there's any question for the panelists, please feel free to ask, or we can do it also outside if we have to leave soon. Thank you.
Drug Policy Consortium. Zin Ko Ko, I wanted to ask you, you knew, because you were talking about accessibility to drug treatment for methamphetamine in the region, right? And I just feel like there's so many issues to raise around that. I mean, one is around the quality and the state of drug treatment services, right? And it's important to ask, what are they like now? And what makes people want to go there or not want to go there? What is the current state of admission into those centres? Because a lot, it can be from your parents making you go, not really giving you a choice, right? Or it could be going through a police procedure where you also don't have a choice. Whether it's here or, I know it varies a bit throughout the region, but it's a huge problem, right? And so I think it's understandable where if you are told that you have to go to a treatment centre and you can't leave until at least 3 months, even more than 3 months, depending on the country, why would you want to go? It's not even tailored to your needs, right? And I mean, I know that you mentioned also that majority of people, not everyone needs treatment, so that's another major thing. So I just wanted to question that, also to raise a big kind of caution mark around promoting increasing admissions into treatment centres when there's such a huge problem around it in this region in particular. And I think second, if most people don't have a disorder that they require treatment, then what about something else that will help? And I know that you talked about other social services, but also, of course, harm reduction services, and I think that's a real lacking need of that.
Thank you very much, Gloria, for raising these very important points. Actually, like we discussed and explained, there were different systems in different countries right now. And according to the presentations from our colleagues that joined the workshop, there were some countries that are still, applying the center-based treatment and treatment mandated by the state or things like that. But what we were discussing at the workshop was how we're going to make our treatment services for those that are actually needing treatment accessible and acceptable as well, and tailored to the individual needs. So that, for example, in Thailand, there has been more than, around 10,000 screening centers, and those centers help screen people, help people identify whether they will require treatment or things like that. So that's happening. But in some countries, this is not the case. And so what we were trying to promote at the workshop was also to have a community-based service with minimal disruption to the social lives, minimally invasive treatment interventions, and those kind of things were kind of discussed. So we identified there are a lot of things that we need to do, like to move forward with the to make the treatment services totally in alignment with the international standards. So there is a long way to go, but the discussions have started, and we also see that there are a lot of challenges still remaining. And harm reduction was one of the main topics that we discussed, and most of the time it seems that people with stimulant use disorders requiring mental health assistance, treatment and care for psychosis, things like that. But we also reminded ourselves that we still need to work on harm reduction and HIV, particularly HIV, hepatitis, and other harms associated with drug use, including the social harms and stigma and discrimination that people are facing. So how are we going to address these? So we don't know, 100%, we're not 100% sure what but we have started discussions on how we are going to tackle it, but we don't have a 100% concrete plan, but that we agree that there is a long way to go, and there are a lot to do more. But this is the situation right now, yes.
I'd like to thank you all again for your time and patience, and I think we have to break up because we are over time and the next group is coming. So thank you again.